This is a sound check. How do I sound? Bum 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 bum. Does it sound good or is it too low or high? We're back. After a little break, me and the missus went on holiday. Went down to Hawaii, down the little island of Oahu. It's a good time. So good the sun got burned very bad. Not very inclined to sunny weather. I'm what you would call very light complected, so I crisp up easily. Anyway, this is coming near the end of this little Civil War series. It's episode 6. After this, we should have about 3 more episodes, and I think after this, I'm gonna take a break from the solo stuff and just focus more on guest episodes and doing stuff with Alex. And a few other guests I have lined up as well, including an interview with an actual Air Force vet sometime within the next couple months. He served during the Cold War era, so he has some very interesting stories. But so, look out for that. Not a whole lot of housekeeping this episode. Nothing super new. Just took a little break because, went on vacation and kind of forgot this thing even existed during that entire time. Other than that, please make sure you follow and like and subscribe and do all those different things on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. It helps a lot. And share this with other people if you like it. If not, I understand. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, without further ado, get into episode 6 of Grant versus Lee, Battle of Cold Harbor. After the conclusion of fighting at North Anna River, the two armies skirmished their way south along Totopotomoy Creek. Try saying that 3 times fast. The whole while, Lee is trying to anticipate Grant's next move when on May 31st, 1864, Grant orders General Sheridan's cavalry to rush further south to the area known as Old Cold Harbor, a crossroads only 10 miles northeast of Richmond. Ever the crafty one, Lee anticipated this move and sent his nephew Fitzhugh Lee, remember him, and his cavalry to intercept Sheridan. It's a little cavalry duel, here at the crossroads. Arriving there first, the Southern troops once again have the advantage of being on the defensive. Fitzhugh's troopers are just able to hold off Sheridan's attack long enough for Brigadier General Thomas Clingman's infantry to arrive and reinforce them. Despite the Confederate reinforcements, though, Sheridan's cavalry is able to push their enemy back southwest an entire half-mile before they dig in fully and don't budge anymore, putting an end to the aggressive combat of that day. Already, there are hundreds of casualties within this first day of fighting. And if you've never heard of Cold Harbor, it's one of the more bloody battles of the Overland Campaign. Not quite so much as bloody as the bloody angle in Spotsylvania Courthouse last episode, but it's up there a little bit. By June 1st, the crossroads of Cold Harbor were now in Union hands, and Federal soldiers were arriving in droves to set up defenses. However, Lee wanted it back. He could not very well leave a major highway essentially leading straight into the heart of their capital in enemy hands. Lee decided it was the Army of North Virginia's turn to take the offensive. He orders Generals Kershaw and Hoke, I think that's how you pronounce his name, didn't feel like looking it up, to attack Sheridan's position. One of the greatest taxes the Confederate Army has had to pay up to this point is in the loss of their experienced commanders, only to be replaced by less qualified and experienced generals. Kershaw and Hoke were some of these new generals, and put into their place after openings had been made, courtesy of Uncle Sam. The good old red, white, and blue little musket ball from Private Jeremiah from Pennsylvania or whatever. They end up dropping the ball in their assault of Sheridan's now dug-in troops. Mainly, a lack of coordination results in a disastrous, sloppy advance. And just to top it off, Sheridan's cavalry is armed with the newest in firearm technology at the time, Spencer repeater rifles, a type of short rifle that could hold several rounds and be loaded by pushing a lever to slide another cartridge into the chamber after firing. This obviously gave them a much faster firing rate than muskets. Kershaw and Hokie are easily blocked and forced to retreat and dig in. Grant, though, quickly saw this as an opportunity to further press the Confederates and finally managed to get in between Lee and Richmond. He quickly sends orders to General Horatio Wrights, who had prior orders to march to the Potomac's far southern flank. His infantry had to backtrack to their planned point of attack before they could initiate, costing them valuable time. They didn't begin their offensive until 5 p.m., and this was all the time the Confederates needed. Wright's men, though, managed to rush through a merely 50-yard gap in Kershaw and Hokie's lines, only to be met by a second line of the Virginian army and repelled. Once again, an almost critical blow failed, and hundreds more lay dead in between the Union and Confederate lines. Grant and Meade meet to try to figure something out. They were beginning to be hard-pressed for a decisive victory, namely the capture of Richmond, which many aristocrats and politicians who believed to know best was the key to ultimate victory. The South by now is steadily declining, and the Union Army has vast resources and manpower readily available compared to the remaining Confederate forces. One would think it was a simple game of waiting and continuing to squeeze, but war is not all about bad guys and good guys. There's also politics. 1864 was an election year. Abraham Lincoln was running for his second term, but he had a popular adversary, former General George B. McClellan. McClellan had not liked being removed from command and decided to run against Lincoln as a Democrat. The biggest point that caused the general turned politician to grow popular with the public was his anti-war stance. Kind of ironic, right? Coming from a general. McClellan promised to issue a ceasefire to the war if he were elected. The Civil War now had been running for 3 years and was never supposed to last longer than a couple weeks in the first place. On top of that, the people in the North had lost many of their men, more than the South, relatively speaking. If you've been paying attention to the numbers in these episodes, the Potomac alone had lost more troops than Lee has in every single battle. Now, that is mainly due to Grant's strategy style, but remember, he was handpicked by President Lincoln himself to be overall commander of the Union armies. That's a political ammo for McClellan. The war had become as much about winning it as it was winning the next election. Because if McClellan was elected president, the war would essentially be lost, and the North and South forever divided. To make matters even worse for the Potomac, many of the soldiers that made up their numbers had enlisted for a 3-year term back in 1861. That meant many of them could now leave at will, and why wouldn't they? Better that than getting thrown into the mincer by Grant's hammer-like tactics. Grant and Meade had pressed their generals and field commanders to do their utmost to entice as many of the men to stay as possible. The Potomac, though, needed results. Grant's overland campaign had provided a lot of ground covered, but that ground was also covered in dead Union soldiers because of that. And still, no real achievement was gained. After much deliberation, Grant and Meade decided on a plan. They would send a massive flanking force around the Confederate lines and cut them off from Richmond, and make one big conjoined push at the same time. The force they chose to flank was General Hancock and the 2nd Infantry Corps. Good old Hancock. He's come in to save the day many a times. Let's see if he can do it again here. But first, Hancock and his corps would have to quickly march 12 miles overnight. They don't arrive in position until 6:30 a.m. on June 2nd. The men of the 2nd Corps are in no shape to attack after this, being utterly exhausted, and Hancock is eager for this plan to work, but knows his men need to be rested in order to carry out what they were about to successfully. They are granted permission to postpone the attack until 5 p.m. Meanwhile, the rest of the Army of North Virginia has established defensive positions, and under the direct supervision of Lee himself, constructs an impressive trench system with crisscross lines of fire, allowing maximum killing efficiency. You get that? Maximum killing efficiency. And for any of you history buffs out there, you might recognize this. You may not be surprised to find out that many commanders in World War I, several decades after this, took a lot of lessons from Lee himself, actually, about digging trenches and how to use them. And, well, I mean, you don't even need to be a big history buff to know how that turned out. So yeah, this guy, knew what he was doing. You're about to see. You're about to see just how much he knew what he was doing. Once again, the Union attack is postponed, thinking it better to attack early the next day rather than near sunset and have to stop what they expected to be a successful attack just before it got dark. At 4:30 a.m., June 3rd, 1864, 50,000 soldiers. You hear that? 50,000. A force close to the size of almost the entire Virginian Army of the 2nd, 6th, and 18th Union Corps, along with divisions led by Generals Burnside and Warren, advance across an almost 7-mile front. Remember those crisscross lines of fire Lee had his men dig? Turns out they worked really well. The Potomac suffered a staggering 7,000 casualties within only the first 30 minutes of their advance. The only troops able to make leeway were Hancock's 2nd Corps, who had gained a bit of the Confederate earthworks and were using it as a place of cover to fire on the other Confederate lines. Little did they know, though, that the Confederate artillery had their position pinged. And the captured earthworks were quickly turned into a death trap. Meanwhile, the 6th Corps is funneled into a ravine as they attack the enemy lines, where they are mowed down on either side by interspersing barrages of muskets and cannons. The Potomac troops can only take so much of this before they begin to freeze and begin digging trenches and foxholes of their own with whatever they can, being shovels, bayonets, or their bare hands. Some of them even build mock earthworks out of the bodies of their comrades. Eventually, at 12:30 p.m., the offensive is brought to a full halt. The only thing being gained was a little bit of ground. Both armies set in for another game of trench warfare. They were playing the numbers game again. By now, the Potomac had roughly 95,000 in total, but could receive more troops when necessary. The Virginia Army had roughly 69,500, and that was it. They weren't getting any reinforcements. The fight between Grant and Lee was becoming one of siege warfare rather than crafty maneuvering. Lee had already established, despite lower numbers, he was capable of outmaneuvering Grant in the first place, then forcing him to attack them while on the defensive, which they were lethal at. For the next 8 days, from June 4th to 12th, the two armies joust between trenches. No more major attacks are made, and fighting is primarily between artillery and snipers. Probably getting antsy again and realizing there was no advantage worth obtaining, Grant once again decides to pack up and march, but this time, he has a new target. He's done with Richmond. Even though it is the Confederate capital, it's still mainly a symbol. After all, the Union wouldn't lose if D.C. were captured, so why would the Confederacy if Richmond were lost? The Southern Army was still putting up a good fight, meaning they still had supplies, somehow, despite losing Vicksburg at Grant's own hands several months prior. They were coming from the city and major railway hub of Petersburg, Virginia, several miles south of Richmond. Grant decided if he was going to give up so many good lives, he would do it for something actually worth it. Alrighty, thank you for listening if you made it this far. I appreciate it a lot. I know there's a little bit of a shorter one, especially, after a long break. Kind of apologize for that, but no, these kind of solo episodes are getting a little boring. Like I said, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from them after this series is done and just focus on the guest episodes, because those are funner to do for me, and you guys I seem to enjoy those way more as well. But that being said, I do have some other series I might like to do sometime, and of course I'm open to suggestions. Other than that, though, this one is done. Should be about 3 more left in this series, and then it'll be over. But yeah, appreciate you listening. Please share it with other people. Tell them about it. Post it on social media if you are so bold to do something like that. That'd be awesome. Follow and like and comment and do all those sorts of different things. They really do help a lot. But yeah, thanks so much for listening, and see you on the next one, which should be with Alex. I think we're going to be doing the Donner Party. Yeah, so that'll be fun. Keep your ears and eyes peeled out for that. But yeah, without further ado, later.